All right, everybody, welcome on in to KBO Chats Live. I'm Sam Pasco alongside Eric Halterman. We're talking everything KBO. That's Korean baseball. We've had some technical issues, no show on Monday, but we do have a show today. Let's see what we can get through. Hopefully the stats will be coming back through. I know there's been a lot going on in terms of fantasy providers and that stats, but we're doing what we can to provide you a great show. And yeah, hopefully it should be a quick one here, kind of giving you a quick update because we know we're competing with that Dodgers-Braves game, which nothing's crazy is going on yet. So we'll get some KBO in right now. And I want to dive right in here, Eric, taking a look at the magic and tragic numbers for the KBO standings. Looking at 7 teams right now in the hunt. Technically, Dinos pretty much all but locked it in. Who do you see as the biggest number 2 challenger for them really in this final 2 weeks?
Yeah, it could really go anywhere. Just want to shout out mykbostats.com. We're using their standings page here. Very great site to anyone who doesn't know about it. I guess I would say it's my second favorite KBO site after the one that employs me, but I spend a lot of time here. Definitely highly recommend. Got, great player histories and tools and all sorts of various things. So definitely highly recommend these guys. And I just thought this standings display is super cool. You can see the disparity in the games remaining for various teams where the Heroes have just 5. Again, they normally scheduled regular season games end this weekend, but the KBO over the next 2 weeks after that plays most of the rescheduled games that they didn't reschedule as doubleheaders before. And since the Heroes play in the Dome, they don't have many of those. So it might be tough for them to make a run up into second. Obviously, as you can see there, if there's 4 teams within half a game, it could really go anywhere depending on who gets hot late. I think I would say probably the Bears. They've been the hottest lately. They've won 10 out of the last 12. They've made it to 5 straight Korean series. There's no doubt about the talent of this team. There was quite a lot of doubt about their pitching staff throughout the year, but it's really coming together lately. And the offense is getting good again. I think of those 4 teams, the Twins, Bears, Wiz, and Heroes, I would say the Bears probably have the best shot at finishing second, which obviously gives you 2 rounds worth of bye. Because, again, in the KBO, 4 plays 5 for the right to play 3, for the right to play 2, for the right to play 1. So every spot is worth a bye in the first few. And I do think the Bears have the best chance at that. Obviously, finishing number 1 is almost impossible for anybody but the Dinos at this point. Their magic number for that is, 6? 6 is their magic number to clinch. Their magic number is 1 to clinch the playoffs, as you see in that second column. So not technically a lock, but as much of a lock as you can get. Be quite a story if they finished 0-11 with the Tigers finishing 13-0 or something like that. But seems like the Dinos have that top spot locked up, and I would definitely lean probably Bears. But again, with 4 teams so close together, it's not easy chances for any of those 4 teams.
Yeah, you said it. Dinos pretty much a lock, not technically quite yet, can't quite celebrate yet, but they're looking pretty good. And the number 2 spot will be super important for the playoffs because that we saw the Bears in that position early on. Then it was the Twins. Then it was the Heroes when they got hot. Then it was KT until recently, and now we're seeing the Twins. And it's going to be super important because they'll get that bye right up into the Super Bowl, if you will, to then ultimately face whoever makes it out of the 3 through 5, and then face the Dinos. So we'll see what happens there. Moving on over to today's games, we got a lot of American starters to dive into. First up is 2 of them facing off against each other in the Kia and LG game. Tigers, they're still kind of in it, like we talked about there. They're winners of 2 of their last 3. And Gagnon, he looked great back in September, at least 2.5 ERA, under 2.5 in September, but 6 earned runs in his last 11 innings pitched in October. What do you feel about Gagnon and the Tigers' chances tonight to stay in the playoff hunt?
Yeah, unfortunately, this could have been an awesome game with a ton of playoff implications, but with the Tigers falling to, I think, 5.5 back of the 5th spot, it's, I guess, still has some playoff implications, but the Tigers are really going to need a run, probably a sweep this weekend against a good Twins team. They have a chance with Gagnon on the mound, though I'd definitely call them underdogs. Gagnon started the year pretty well, had a bit of a rough patch, but had been on a 7-start run where he'd allowed 2 or fewer earned runs until his last start was quite poor, 4 runs in just 5 innings. But again, it's most of his recent outings have been quite good, and he was quite good for most of the early part of the year. So I think there's not much reason to doubt that he's a strong starter, not quite in contention for the best starter in the KBO by any means, but I think he's got every chance to hold the Twins to just 2 or 3 in this one.
So nothing crazy for Gagnon. Taking a look at Kelly, and a big reason why you'd probably say the Tigers are underdogs, even with Gagnon pitching, is because of what Casey Kelly did in his last start. 9 innings, shut out the Dinos, held them to 2 hits, and had 6 strikeouts. You know, we made fun of him and Tyler Wilson early in the season, but he's really turned it around and looks like a solid ace for what is going to be the number 2 team potentially come playoff bracket time.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly was supposed to be in contention for best pitcher in the league, top 5 at least, and he was not that early in the year, had an ERA in the mid to low 4s for, 10, 15-ish starts into the season, maybe more just 10, but it was not what we know he's capable of, but he's definitely been that now. In his last 12 starts, he has 11 quality starts, and over that 12-start stretch, he has a 2.02 ERA and a WHIP under 1. I think, again, for that 12-start stretch, he's absolutely in consideration for the best starter in the league. There are not anyone, I don't think there's anyone you could say is clearly better than him for the last couple months. And given that the Tigers lineup really just has not been that good throughout the year, Preston Tucker, Hyung-Woo Choi, at least they'll get the platoon advantage against Kelly, but they just have not gotten enough help from the rest of the unit. Preston Tucker did reach 30 homers and 100 RBI, I believe, this morning, last night, however you want to call it. So congrats to him for that. It's definitely been a quality season from him, but I don't think that he and Choi are going to get enough help to topple Kelly here.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a challenge when you say that Kelly is one of the best pitchers right now. I mean, that would be a crazy statement to say. You'd have to say Brooks or Straley would be at least in that conversation, but Kelly has really put himself in the front of that pack. In terms of moving into the offense, Barry here, welcome on in, Barry. Saying that maybe the bats on the road for the Tigers might not be amazing, but we saw in their last 3 games them put up 26 runs compared to the Twins putting up just 8 runs over their last 3 games. There's no Ramos for the Twins. Who do you give the edge to offensively in this matchup?
Yeah, even without Ramos, I think there's more depth to that Twins lineup. I wouldn't expect a ton of runs from them against Gagnon, but Hyun-Soo Kim is excellent. The only former major leaguer on the lineup because Ramos never advanced beyond AAA. And most of the top 5 or so guys are guys I've recommended in my DFS cheat sheets in the past. Obviously, no cheat sheet today because DraftKings KBO contests are still down due to that stats provider outage. It seems like they intend to bring them back at some point, at which point I'll be recommending more Twins again. Definitely like their lineup more than the Tigers, but I think they'll have a pretty tough time against Gagnon here. Also, this is being played in the most pitcher-friendly park in the league, Jamsil Baseball Stadium in Seoul. So that's going to further help these 2 pitchers who don't really need much help at all.
All right, moving our way to making the pick. Twins are the favorite here, over under at 8 because of these 2 great pitchers. We got some comments here, liking the under potentially because of these aces. What do we feel? Where are we going, Eric?
Yeah, I wish the under wasn't maybe literally the lowest I can remember, but I think you still have to go with it. They did make it tough here, but given the way Kelly's pitching for, I think, over half the season at this point, given the way Gagnon's pitched most of his recent outings, and I think you got to go Twins. It's 2 good pitchers, but when the better lineup also has the better starter who's been pitching better lately, I think it's tough to make a case for the Tigers. Though Gagnon's good enough that if you want to pick an upset, it's not out of question that he can outduel Kelly.
All right, we'll see what happens there. Moving on over to the next game, we have the KT Wiz against the SK Wyverns. The Wyverns are out of the playoff hunt, but the Wiz are very much in it, and they're going to need Despaigne if they want to make any sort of impact in the playoffs. He had an ERA under 3 in September, maybe looking like he's turning things around, him and Cuevas being a 1-2 punch at the top of that rotation. But since September, now in October, 9 earned runs in his last 10 innings pitched. Are you concerned at all with Despaigne and his performance on this Wiz team coming down the stretch?
Yeah, I mean, even in that strong September, he wasn't giving up runs, but his strikeout and walk numbers were pretty shaky. His last 4 starts of September, 11 strikeouts against just 10 walks. So it's not as if he was dominating by any means, and some decently high hit numbers in most of those starts. Obviously, has that one against the Wyverns that was excellent, where he only allowed 1 hit. But he really hasn't been a dominant pitcher for quite a bit now. And in his last 3 starts, he's got an ERA of 7.56 and a WHIP over 2. So he really has not been that ace that they Wiz need him to be. He's been escaping with some low run totals the majority of his recent outings, but not his last few. So if they weren't playing the Wyverns here, I think I'd be pretty worried. He definitely gets a lot of help from the fact that he's facing one of the weakest lineups in the league and one with nothing left to play for, unless they care a lot about not finishing behind the Eagles, which I don't know if that really is much of a motivator here.
All right, now turning our attention to SK's pitcher. I don't know if he has much motivation. We haven't seen a lot of him, only 1 appearance logged, but it was fairly decent. 4 2/3 innings pitched, 3 hits, 1 earned run, and 1 strikeout. 3 walks weren't great, but overall, I don't really know what to make of him just because we haven't seen too much of Jung this season.
Yeah, and that might be interesting if he were born in 2000, but he was born in 1990. He's a 30-year-old who's just making his second outing of the season. He has a career 6.75 ERA and a 1.82 WHIP in his 5th season now. And in each of those seasons, he had an ERA above 6. So he's never been good. He's a 30-year-old who's never been good at any point and is making just his second start of the year in one of the final games of the season for a team that's nearly eliminated. So I think that tells the story pretty well. Very much not the first guy they turn to, and I think there's a reason for that. I wouldn't expect big things from him at all. He didn't give up many runs in his last outing, but it was against pretty mediocre Tigers offense, and he walked 3 and struck out just 1. So I would not expect him to be able to shut down Mel Rojas and the Wiz here.
Yeah, maybe more of like a Barry Zito type situation towards the end of the career where they just bring him back, older guy, but I don't know, not a lot of stats as we see here. ERA not even registering here. So moving to that offense, you mentioned Mel Rojas Jr., got Despaigne in the bump. That's generally a pretty good recipe. KT did lose yesterday, though. They were shut out. Rojas is as hot as ever, but when you look at the surrounding lineup, are you worried about that game yesterday and it may be transferring into this game?
I would be more worried if it was against pretty much any other pitcher. I don't think there's really much reason to worry against a guy like Soo-Min Jung here. Would have preferred to see the Wiz entering the home stretch with a lot more hot hitters, but I don't think they'll need a whole lot here against Jung. And speaking of Mel Rojas on the Triple Crown watch, he is still trailing Asapsan by 7 points, 357 to 350 in batting average. But very much has a chance. I mean, he could well move ahead of him in this game, given the matchup here. But he also has 4 guys within 10 points of his batting average. Some good names, too. Hyung-Woo Choi, Jose Fernandez, and Min-Woo Park. I guess that's just 3. Should learn to count here. But that's 3 guys who have a chance to pass him and 1 more guy he still has to catch. But it's going to come down to the wire, and he's got a chance, especially if he gets to play the Wyverns 3 times. That definitely doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it can be a one-man wrecking crew here. The total is set at 10 runs. As the Wyverns actually scored quite a bit yesterday, 10-3 victory against the Lions. Romack, 5 RBIs, pretty impressive. He's on a 4-game hitting streak with 3 home runs, putting up some Mel Rojas Jr. like numbers. We're going with the total and the money line pick.
Yeah, and Jung Choi has 5 homers in his last 10 games, too, for the Wyverns. So there's something there. If the Wyverns had Sungwon Moon on the mound or somebody like that, I would maybe pick the upset. But I cannot pick. I can't pick a 30-year-old who's making just his second start, who has a career ERA well over 6. So it's going to be Wiz for me pretty easily. And I'll go over as well. I think the Wiz could well hit that over on their own. And Despaigne, I'm not particularly high on at the moment. So I think even an offense like the Wyverns should be able to score a few off of him.
All right, we're going with the Wiz and the over 10 runs. Barry, note some stats there as well. See what happens with Despaigne start tonight/tomorrow morning, depending on where you are in the morning in the world. Moving over to the Giants and Dinos matchup. It is a Drew Rosinski day. Pretty cool to see him on the bump. He's coming off a loss, but he had 2 straight starts before that were very impressive. You may be worried about the strikeouts. We talk a lot about strikeout numbers a lot on the show here. His last 3, he had 13 in total. But the 3 before that, he had a total of 25. Are we worried about him? Or are we saying, he's facing the Giants, nothing crazy, he can handle it?
Yeah, he's maybe not been at his early season form of late. He did have that stretch, I think it was in September, where he had 3 out of 5, where he was giving up at least 5 earned runs. He's been better than that lately. 3 of his last 5 starts, he hasn't allowed any runs, but he's allowed 4 in the other 2. So it hasn't been a dominant recent run necessarily. Although if you go back over his last 8, it's a 2.49 ERA and a 1.16 WHIP. So it's been, a couple months now of some pretty good performances. Yeah, I guess it was August where he was bad, not September. Thanks for pointing that out on screen. So he's been pretty good for a while now. He's not perfect. He's been prone to the occasional blow up, and he's coming off an outing in which he allowed 4 runs. So I wouldn't expect him to, definitely cruise through here. I think there's a comment in the chat that the Dinos could be a trap in this one. It's an interesting point. I would definitely consider them favorites, but Rucinski is beatable. He has been shaky at times, is not coming off his best start. And the Dinos as a whole have been quite shaky lately, just 2 wins in their last 10. But I can't help but think that a lot of that's because they've all but locked up the number 1 seed. I think when that run started, they had something close to 8-ish game lead at the top of the standings. They could afford to go 2-8 over their next 10 and still be totally fine. I would feel more confident if they hadn't, but I'm not necessarily reading a ton into that. Although, again, if their motivation is off, you wouldn't necessarily expect them to play like the Dinos that we're used to in the last couple weeks here. So it's a bit of a worry. Trap is maybe a little bit stronger than I'd go, but I could definitely understand some of the thinking there.
Yeah, definitely concerning because the offense has been rolling. Last 3 games, they put up 11, then 8, and then 9, but yet 1 and 2 in those games. The total is set at 10 runs, and the Dinos have pretty much hit that on by themselves the last 3. How do we feel about that? With the Giants, they scored 17 on Tuesday, but only 5 since. How do we feel about these offenses producing a lot of runs tonight, even with a former/current ace in Rosinski on the bump?
Yeah, it's a heavily right-handed lineup for the Giants, which will hurt them a bit against Rucinski here. Not a terrible lineup, but not a particularly good one. But I wouldn't necessarily expect a ton of runs from their side. Might not expect a ton of runs from the Dino side either, because Seung-Hyun Lee has looked quite good lately. He was the 3rd overall pick in 2018. He's 21 years old, just 6 career starts, 5 of them this season. His first 3 this year were pretty unimpressive, but in his last 2, he hasn't allowed a single run, 13 scoreless innings, just 7 hits in those 13 innings, 12 strikeouts against just 1 walk. So it's pretty much doing everything you'd want to see. Obviously, it's a very short track record and not necessarily facing lineups like the Dinos, but who knows if the Dinos are, the Dinos that we're used to right now. So I think he's got a shot. I think if you want to pick an upset, there's enough here that I think you could do it without feeling too bad about it.
Yeah, I mean, normally you wouldn't look at a guy that has an ERA 31.5 in 2019 as an upset guy, but you realize he just threw 2 innings there. So see what happens with Lee, definitely in that upset role. Are you going to pick the upset, though? Are you confident enough to go against the Dinos when they're so close to officially locking it up?
I'm going to pick the Dinos. I do expect them to win, but I don't necessarily like that minus 425 there. I think if you're getting those kind of odds, I think it's much closer to 50-50 than that would make you believe. So I do think it's the Dinos, but it's more a 55-45, 60-40 kind of deal, not a definite win here like you might expect with it being Radzinski against a guy who's just made 6 career starts. I definitely think Sung-Hong Lee has shown enough recently, and the Dinos have lost enough recent games that it's only a very, very pretty narrow advantage for him.
All right, and the total, over under 10 runs.
I'm going to go under because I do think Sung-Hong Lee has shown some interesting things, and I think it's more likely than not that Radzinski's strong.
All right, that's what we're looking at with the Giants-Dinos game. Moving on over to the Bears and Heroes matchup. We got Jake Brigham pitching tonight. Pretty impressive in his last start, 7 strong innings, no runs, and 5 strikeouts. And he'll be facing Kim, who hasn't gone more than 3 innings since September 17th. I got to think you're going with the Heroes here, but they have been falling. Recently, the Bears have been pretty hot. How do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, the Heroes have been shaky for quite a while, and the Bears just swept the Eagles, which isn't very impressive for anyone except the Bears, who had really struggled with them. They now might finish the season with a winning record against the worst team in the league, so congratulations to them on that. If they had somebody other than Min-Gyu Kim, I would give him a shot here, but he's been mostly a reliever this year, 22 relief appearances against just 3 starts. Hasn't been particularly good in either role, gave up 6 runs in 3 2/3 innings against the Wiz back in late September in his most recent start. He does actually have a high strikeout rate, 24.2%, which is 6-7 ticks above league average. But he spent most of the year in relief, and you expect guys' strikeout rate to fall when they're pitching out of the rotation. So I don't think there's enough. Given that one thing, I don't think that's enough to say that he should be an interesting starter when he gets the opportunity to start, especially given that he's had that opportunity and got knocked around. The Heroes have not been necessarily the lineup you'd expect them to be, given some of their talent in that lineup. So there's a path here for the Bears to win, especially because they've gone 10-2 over the last 12. But gap between Min-Gyu Kim and Jake Brigham, I think, is too big for me to pick them here.
Yeah, I'd say so too. One interesting note, taking a look at Brigham, this is his 4th year in the KBO, and in his last 4 starts coming down the stretch in 2019, which was in September because of the weird schedule shift, but 25 innings pitched and just 6 runs. So you got to think veteran coming down the stretch, maybe that he can provide them a little extra juice compared to more younger guys that might have that inexperience in the KBO. But we'll see what he has tonight. Offensively, speaking of like a young KBO guy, Addison Russell, 0 for 9 this week, didn't play yesterday. What do we make of him now? Is he a difference maker now? He looked like he could be, maybe, but he never really took that step forward. How do you assess his role in this Heroes lineup now that he's batting, 7th?
Yeah, I write in my cheat sheets often that, you got to give the benefit of the doubt to former MLB players when they make the step down in a level. I think baseball fans are always going to overreact to small samples. Kind of can't help doing that. And when you see a small sample of a guy who's supposed to be good looking very average, you're tempted to overreact. But I don't know how small a 62-game sample is at this point. And he's got an OPS under 650. It's not good at all, and it's not short anymore either. So I definitely don't really see a reason to view him as an offensive force at this point. Just that 1 home run. I think he actually does have 2 now. I think you're seeing the effects of our stats provider outage there, but hey, at least we call it out in a big red banner there. He did hit his 2nd home run at the end of last week on Sunday. But yeah, 2 homers in 62 games from a former major leaguer. It's not at all what the Heroes were envisioning there. So I don't really see a reason to treat him as an offensive force. Now, of course, given that he has the major league pedigree, if he does suddenly heat up over these last 2 weeks, I'm much more likely to buy into it than a hot streak from someone else who has had this mediocre a start to the season. But I no signs that it's coming anytime soon.
All right. So I'm not really buying into Russell quite yet in that lineup. 10 runs is the total. And with the Bears, that always seems too low. They scored 16 yesterday with 5 players having 2 or more hits. Barry is noting, of course, some Jake Brigham stats not facing the Bears, potentially lowering that. Where are we going with the total here when you combine the ace level production of Brigham against the explosive Tucson Bears offense?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, too, about the Bears being so lefty heavy and Brigham struggling against lefties. Definitely is a point in the Bears' favor. I think that does give path to pick a Bears upset for anyone interested in that. I wouldn't push too hard against it. Again, Bears have been better lately. But I just think one of the better starters in the KBO versus, a swing man at best. Basically a reliever who hasn't been particularly good as a reliever. The gap there is too big. So I think I'm going to side heroes. I think Brigham can keep the runs down enough. But I do think the heroes should be able to score off Kim. 10, I think, is an interesting number. It's right in the middle there. But I will go slightly over. I just don't see really much in Mingyu Kim. It would surprise me if he suddenly had a 5 shutout innings or anything like that, even against a pretty mediocre Heroes lineup. So I think they'll score enough, and I don't think Brigham can necessarily completely shut down a lineup with as many strong lefties as the Bears have.
All right, that's what we're looking at in this domed game. So it will happen barring weather. Bears, Heroes, going with the Heroes and the over 10 runs. Last game here, non-playoff contenders. I mean, Lions, I want to say, something crazy could happen, but they are out of the mix. But at least you get a David Buchanan game. He can be crazy good or crazy bad, depending on what mood he's in. 6 strong innings was his result last time out. 19 total strikeouts in his last 3 games combined against just 5 walks. You like Buchanan? Take a look at this overall year. I know it's been up and down, but do you like him as a pitcher overall?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly been pretty good on the whole. Not perfectly reliable, but I think it's been quite a while since he had his last blow up. That was something we talked about a lot early in the year because he had quite a few for someone who was generally quite good. But I think it's been quite a while since he's had one of those 8 runs that he has a couple of earlier in the year. In his last 5 starts, he has 4 quality starts. He's got a 2.64 ERA over that stretch. 130 whip is not elite there, but good enough. He's also generally been a mediocre, low-ish strikeout guy. 15.7% strikeout rate on the season is about 2 percentage points below the league average. But in those last 5 starts, he struck out 30 batters in 30.2 innings. So it seems like he's putting away guys a little bit more often recently, which is good to see. And against the lineup as weak as the Eagles, I don't see any reason to believe he'd have many struggles here. I would definitely expect another quality start. He's got a good chance of going pretty deep into the game too. I think he seems to hit 7 and 8 more often than most starters in the KBO. So I think he's got quite a good shot at 2 runs in 7 innings kind of deal here.
Yeah, I like it. In case you're just tuning in, this is KBO Chats Live. We're giving picks for each KBO game. This is the last one. We're going to go over our top 3 picks here in just a moment. But looking at David Buchanan, who's been great for the Lions on the whole this season, against Park, who has an ERA over 7.5 in each of the last 3 seasons. Did okay, kind of bad his last time out. Kind of just jumping into the pick here because there's a lot of edge overall for fans that don't understand. There's not a lot of people are on the KBO, so there's a lot of edge to be had. So these picks can have a lot of value. Lions are favored, but looking at that pitching matchup and 8.5 runs, where do you feel we're leaning towards, Eric?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect Buchanan to give up too many, but 8.5 is incredibly low for a game with Ju-Hung Park pitching in it. He's got a career ERA of 8.37, a career whip of 1.93. So yeah, nearly 2 base runners per inning over the course of his career. Not a long career, but 76 in a third inning over the last 3 seasons is not nothing. Still a young guy, might turn into something, but 13 strikeouts against 11 walks in 19 and a third innings this year. There's just nothing in this resume here. When you're someone that the Eagles have only turned to for 19 innings, given their alternatives, you know that there's not much on the resume here. Wouldn't expect him to go very deep in this one. He's topped out at 5 innings and 80 pitches. That came all the way back in mid-August. His last start, he lasted just 4 innings and 76 pitches. But given the way he pitches, I would almost think the Lions would wish that he threw 6 or 7 in this one. So I'd expect them to score quite a few during his innings and get quite close to that over-under on their own just in the first few frames.
I'd have to agree as well. But just looking at these two teams offensively, their past 3 games, there's been no runs at all. There's been 12 total runs scored by these two teams over their last 3 games, 8 of which coming from the Lions, 4 from Hanwha. I mean, they're not good offenses overall. So you really expect them to explode against, even a bad pitcher like Park?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but that's purely because Park is, beyond bad. I mean, ERA over 8 for your career. I don't think you have to be very good lineup to score a lot in that situation. The Lions definitely pretty mediocre lineup on the season, and that's even with getting to play half their games in the league's most hitter-friendly park, which they won't do here. So I wouldn't expect them to single-handedly hit the over-under against many pitchers, but I think it says a lot about Joo-Hung Park that is what I'm expecting here.
Wow, that bad, and he'll make us take the over here and go with the Lions, and that's all 5 games. Let's jump into our top 3 picks, taking a look at the totals and the money line for all these games. Where are you going with the number 1 pick, Eric?
I think number 1 has to be Wiz over Wyverns. Despaigne's been shakier than I want for being the number 1 pick, but just nothing from Soo-Min Jung, and the Wyverns have nothing left to play for, whereas every game matters quite a ton for the Wiz with those 4 teams separated by just half a game in the middle of that playoff picture. So I think that's pretty easy number 1 for me. Number 2 is going to be that game we just talked about. I think David Buchanan is just so much better than Joo-Hung Park here, even though it's 2 pretty mediocre lineups. I just think that's a pretty massive gap there. And number 3, I think I'm going to go have a lot of faith in Casey Kelly, and I'm going to pick Casey Kelly against the Tigers. Even though the gap between him and Drew Gagnon is lower than it would be against most pitchers in the league, Kelly's just been so good for several months now, and the Tigers don't have a particularly great lineup. Twins have a better lineup even without Roberto Ramos. So it's maybe less confident in that than most number 3s, but I think Kelly's been that good. Other ones I would have considered the over in that last game just because no faith in Joo-Hung Park. I think that was probably the only other one that I was thinking of pretty strongly here.
Yeah, really ripping on Park tonight. The bad career ERA against a bad lineup, but we'll see. Lions expecting to explode with that pretty low total as well. Top 3 picks there, as you can see on the screen. Wiz, Lions, Twins, Barry's top picks. Same thing, same order. Picking against the Wyverns, Eagles, and then the Tigers. Tigers aren't normally in that bunch, but going with them because of Kelly. And that's all we got for you today. Thank you for tuning in to KBO Chats Live. You can check out rotowire.com/free KBO for all your KBO needs. Not necessarily right now because we are having some issues with some outages, but that will be updated hopefully very soon. And again, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for coming back after our brief time off there, and I expect we'll be on Mondays and Thursdays as usual through the end of the season here.